All right, here we go. Thanks for joining, everybody. This here is Script Camp's class on theme. Today we'll be talking about theme and dramatic argument as it pertains to storytelling, mostly focused on movies and features just because that is my area of expertise, but this does apply to all kinds of fiction. Books, pilots, no matter what it is you're working on, every story will have its own theme, and if you don't really pick a theme, then the audience kind of picks one for you. So it's best to go into this with a strong sense of intention and actually work towards cohesively working your way up towards building a dramatic argument rather than just seeing where it kind of falls. But we will talk about ways to sort of manage that and approach that in this class today. So thanks for joining. We are part of Script Camp. Most of our classes like this are taught in these stage channels, meaning that you do have to raise a hand if you want to speak and be heard aloud. So click that hand raising icon if you ever want to speak on the mic. And if you are offering things like loglines or scenes or things like that for help in our various events, then you should be ready to speak aloud and answer questions. So Script Camp and Word Camp, our two writing focused servers, are two of the servers from Skill Camp, which is this big group of servers. You see we have lots of different ones focused on different topics: filmmaking, animation, coding, learning languages, graphic design. All these different camps that you can see here with lots of free classes, table reads, script swaps, writers groups on Script Camp and Word Camp. We also have some classes that are for our supporting members. So if you're interested in joining beyond just these free public open classes, then I would go to scriptcamp.net, and there you can sign up for unlimited membership, which includes access to every class and every event on every server, not just on Script Camp, but also on Word, Film, Code, Tune, Creator, Design, and Lingo camps. With over 100 hours of events every month, we have access to video library. You get huge discounts off consultations and proofreads, exclusive Discord channel access, and also you will get 100 script coins a month, or scriptocurrency as I like to call them, and you can spend those on things like table reads for your scripts, or silly merchandise, or on events like that. So check that out. You'll see all the things that you can purchase with those script coins if you sign up. And again, that includes every event on every server, not just on Script Camp. So that will also include events on things like Word Camp and Code Camp, which we'll show you in just a second. As for me, I'm mostly a screenwriter, feature-focused screenwriter, though I did write for Creepshow on TV, on Shudder. And I have been a rep screenwriter since 2017. I've placed in a few contests and things like this. You can read this here if you want to. I don't like getting way too into all this. But I mostly do horror, thriller, and action, and I also do, besides writing specs, I'm also doing rewrites and polishes and things like this, mostly on low-budget horror and thriller kind of movies. So here's some upcoming free classes. We have Spec Spotlight on May 19th. This is like a book club. This is the day after tomorrow. And this is where you'll be reading specs from professionals, and you will come in and be able to discuss and look at the things like theme and argument, perhaps, as aspects of that, but that's just one of many different topics to look at here. We have novel world building. That's going to be tomorrow, Saturdays, 12 to 2. We have novel writing classes, and we're currently doing outlining, working our way up towards that novel boot camp where you'll be starting a brand new book and writing it in 90 days. So the first half of the class is all going to be that planning and outlining, all that architecture stuff. That's, again, Saturdays, 12 to 2 on Word Camp. We have a new group called Mystery Writers Group, Mystery and Crime. Thriller people will love to come by on Wednesdays. May 22nd is the next meeting coming up, where there are events like readings and exercises and activities and all kinds of fun stuff in that genre. We have lots of other genre groups too, but that's our newest one. And then last, the Victory Lap is what I'm calling it for now, but this is kind of just like stupid third act tricks, I guess you'd call it. May 31st is just a new class on third act, and some new techniques and tips and things I've been working on. And we'll be doing a couple more of those in that time slot as well. Just fun, isolated classes you can just stop by without signing up. Come by anytime. Here's a bunch more coming up. Tone and genre on the 24th. Writing pilots on the 7th. That's the start of our new pilot boot camp. And that proceeds into week 1 of that class, which is on the 13th, where we go from week 0 to week 1, which is focused on story engine and logline. Sundays 10 to noon, we're running pilot boot camp with the new one starting on the 14th of June. One is currently running. And that runs Sunday mornings, but when it concludes, that flips to the Friday slot. And then Saturdays, we have novel outlining 12 to 2 every Saturday up until that novel boot camp starts. on the 8th of June, which is going to be the opening intro class, the overview of the 90-day novel kind of thing. And then we will start week 1 of that on the 15th. And after that, you got to subscribe. So definitely check out those couple free classes if you want to get a taste. And then sign up for the full course if you want to write that whole book. Plenty of recurring events and stuff coming up. June and July, new classes on Code Camp, UI design, and Discord bots. We have weekly Writers Lab on Script Camp twice a week. That's twice bi-weekly, right? Not weekly. So that would be on Saturdays, 4 to 6, and Fridays, 12 to 2. We also have various advanced labs that you have to apply for, but you can see there's a couple here, like advanced fiction and advanced screenwriters. So much stuff to do, so much to join, so much to do, so much to see, etc. You can sign up for just one single class if you really want to at scriptcamp.net/classes, but you will save a lot by signing up to become an unlimited member, which you can do for as low as $19 a month if you are signed up for the yearly option. You can see in the chat there's a poll. If you are interested in signing up for a program, you can click those little numbers, those blue little numbers in the chat, and indicate which program you're interested in, or if you have questions about it, or if you plan to sign up. If you're looking for where to find the chat, you can mouse over the Classroom channel on the left-hand side of your Discord window and find that small white word bubble that says Open Chat. Just click on that, and you should open the Discord chat on the right-hand side of your screen. Okay, so now that we're all caught up, that's all the advertising we've got to do. Ideally, if you're interested in doing these, you will be signing up soon. But even if not, feel free to stick around these free classes, and we're glad to have you. Shall we get into theme for today? So we'll be hearing a lot from Stephen King, because he's done quite a lot of writing on this. And he kind of explains this overall by saying every book or every one worth reading is about something. And ultimately, that's what theme is just kind of this answer to. It's more than just what is happening in the story. It's what does it mean? Why did we tell this story? What are you trying to say, or what is the author trying to say about life, love, human nature, the man's inhumanity to man, or whatever other topic or whatever other dramatic argument they're trying to build. It sort of clarifies the point of why you told the story in the first place, because stories are more than just amusing. They're various forms of life lessons. This goes back to just the original purpose of storytelling in the first place. If you look at first ever story was a horror story called Bear in Cave, Don't Go in Cave. Then you can look at, well, it's a pretty easy dramatic argument for that story, right? Don't go in caves. It was a warning and a way to spread a social message, or a way to ensure the survival of the species, to help us in a way. Stories are more than just to keep us entertained for 30 minutes while you are on your cell phone. They are to teach us things and help us learn about the world and to make us better people. And it sounds maybe a little ridiculous when you're like, I only want to write movies about, robots shooting each other. How am I going to help the world or make a statement about humanity or something like that? Well, you absolutely will. And you can look at all kinds of stories, no matter what the genre, no matter what kind of audience they're writing towards. Every story ends up having some kind of dramatic argument. It doesn't mean that the audience has to agree 100% with that argument or with that statement or with that thought about the world. And some dramatic arguments are even deliberately built to challenge you and to go, do you agree with this? Is this how the world works? Should this be how the world works? Especially when you look at things like tragedies or tragedies based on true stories. You'll really see a lot of that kind of dramatic argument where it will be things like, this is how it is. Yes, it sucks. Are you okay with that? That's kind of the question that we're left with at the end of a lot of tragic true stories. Think of a movie like Fruitvale Station or something like this, right? Where it's like, yeah, that awful messed up thing happened in real life, and the bad guys got away with it, basically. I mean, they got a slap on the wrist for murdering a guy. And then the last couple shots of that movie are real footage from the vigil for that actual guy that really died in real life, right? And that's sort of to say, the dramatic argument we built up to there is more of a lingering question that you're supposed to take into real life and ask your friends and yourself and, create these conversations. Because we built a sort of deliberately unsatisfying story with the express purpose of making you go, that wasn't satisfying. That wasn't the ending I wanted. That wasn't fair. You see what I mean? You can create this deliberately unsatisfying ending sometimes if it helps to further the dramatic argument that you're ultimately going on to create, whether that's a positive one, a negative one, or any kind of ambiguous one in between. So, just because a story ends in an unsatisfying way doesn't mean it doesn't have a dramatic argument. In fact, some of the best ones are created by these unfun endings. But then again, happy endings, or whatever we would call happy endings, have their own version of dramatic arguments that link very easily to that sort of ending too. Usually those are going to be, quote, happier and less challenging stories that are about good winning, love conquering all, things like this. Very familiar arguments that we've seen many times before, but doesn't make them any less true. Here's a general overview of everything we're going to do today. We're not going to actually go in this exact order, and I do have some different ideas and some new things to throw in here and there. But we will essentially be looking at what is theme. There's obviously no homework. Why do we have a homework thing? Yes, turn in your algebra. So yeah, there's no, this is not a boot camp class, so we will start by just going over what do we mean by theme, what is theme. We've kind of touched on this a little, but we will go on to build out that definition further. Theme and argument, this idea of argument, which we've been bandying about. How do you make an argument by talking to yourself? Anti-theme is another idea that's tied in with these. So anti-theme being sort of like the character or aspect of your story that is the embodiment of the opposite of what the ultimate theme will end up being. Usually the main character kind of embodies the anti-theme at the beginning, and then through the story they become the embodiment of the true theme as they understand the truth that they've been denying or trying to avoid, or they haven't been strong enough to accept yet in some way, at least in a positive arc story. We'll look at a new series of slides, which is brand new for this class, called Theme by Genre, and I have a bunch of new bonus tips for horror themes, just considering that is my normal area. And then we will be looking at some examples like Guy Climbs a Mountain, which is an old slide of mine that I've done a million times, so I'll go through it pretty quickly, but I just find it makes a pretty good basic illustration of what a dramatic argument is and how to kind of go about constructing one. And towards the end we will have time for, of course, plenty of questions, exercises, and then an open lab period to ask, what are you guys working on, especially if it's going to be questions related to theme and argument. Ideally they are in that same kind of realm, but we will just ask, what questions do you have? What would you like to work on? Whew, I think I'm talking too fast and it's making me exhaust myself, so let me just take my theater teacher's notes from throughout my whole life, which is always slow down. Don't sound like you have Hollywood cocaine energy. In fact, slow yourself. That's what I will do. So I don't want to collapse on cam from using all my breath. Alright, so let's start with some basics. We talked about this idea of dramatic argument. It's what your story is trying to sort of say about the world or human nature, humanity, existence, reality. It can be any size. It could be big or small. You can have a dramatic argument about how to be a better friend, or how to, what is this really old one? If you love someone, let them go. Like one of these kind of romantic or relationship-based themes. Your theme could be tied to all of existence, right? You could have a theme that's all about, look at something like Cormac McCarthy stories, and sometimes it's about like an old guy that works on a farm, but it's a story about like the inevitable entropy of the universe. You know what I mean? Like about the decline of the human character and like the death of the first man, which is all men, or something like that. Like these very literary kind of themes, which sometimes expand to become much bigger than the story that they are otherwise in. You could have a story about a guy just trying to eat a sandwich that is about, the futility of pursuing what you want, right? Like you could have a theme from any size of story that covers pretty much any type of subject matter. It's not like you have to write an epic sci-fi if you want to write a story about the passage of time. You can write epic sci-fi if you want to explore that idea of the passage of time through a sci-fi lens. Look at something like Interstellar, right? Where time is kind of one of the great enemies that the characters are facing in that story. And it's about kind of being afraid of time, about how we will, run out of time on Earth, we'll run out of time with our family, and unless, people take drastic action and great people like these great scientists, unless they move the species forward and they take these huge risks and these huge leaps into the unknown, then we may run out of time, we may run out of resources, we may, fall into ruin in whatever way. So the subject matter and the genre are not exactly tied to the specific arguments you can make. There are certain tendencies within certain genres to gravitate towards certain types of themes that we will be talking about today, and some stories just kind of have to have like one of 5 different themes, more or less. It doesn't mean that they're limited or bad, and just because stories have the same theme doesn't mean that they're repetitive or expressing it in the same way. because a lot of the time we're going to get some of these strongest themes when they're actually something that we are, like the argument isn't something we've never heard before. It's actually something we already know, but you're telling it to us in a new way that we wouldn't have expected. You're sort of reminding us of something that we know to be true deep down on the inside, and that can be some of the absolute strongest storytelling. In fact, if you try to make up a brand new theme that's never been expressed before, you have to sometimes walk us through a lot of extra steps, and it can get quite complicated to build a dramatic argument using building blocks that the viewer is not even familiar with. So, like, I wouldn't try to innovate way too much with the type of theme that your story can have. Simpler themes are not worse. A story that has a more straightforward, clearer dramatic, like we really require simplicity and clarity for themes to come through. So don't overthink or overcomplicate this. And I think that I should have had a whole slide about this, but I think I do want to touch on this idea of muddy or murky character arcs that end up obfuscating the theme by being too nuanced. So movies are like short stories. They're not novels, right? Like, we don't have tons of space to go into every little tiny detail and like the specific nuances of what the characters want, but they don't exactly want it, but they have misgivings about it in this way. But it's complicated. It's not that great. I mean, think of this, right? What is Lord of the Rings kind of generally about? The dramatic argument. It centers on this idea that it is through the brave acts of ordinary people that evil can ultimately be overcome. It's not about grand heroics. It's about, the way that we will defeat evil is by the common man keeps on going, keeps trying, and keeps trying to preserve the small and peaceful life that he has created for himself, right? Pretty simple. You can see where that comes from. Tolkien's history as a soldier in World War One, as somebody that was forced to go on his own sort of ultimate quest and come back home, and he was broken by this war in the same way that Frodo was ultimately broken by the burden of the ring. But how messy would it be if, think of the first 30 minutes of the movie, depending on if you're in extended or normal, or the first, 50 pages of the book if you're in the books. We see the Shire, and we spend a lot of time there. And what's it like? Is it nice, or is it bad? Feel free to weigh in sometimes I'll just ask a question and throw it to the room. You can use the text chat to weigh in, or you can raise a hand. Who knows their Lord of the Rings? Nacho. Okay. Wait, I thought Nacho doesn't know Lord of the Rings, or doesn't read it? Hasn't seen them all? Something?
Yeah, I guess I don't know Lord of the Rings too much, but I guess one thing I'd say, it seems like, theme kind of means like a lot of different things, as you're like in school, it's sort of like sometimes like your English teacher is trying to drill into you, it's like, man versus something, or you know what I'm saying? So there maybe like just the idea, like what is a theme is sometimes like people sort of define it in different ways, I guess. But so could you repeat the question about Lord of the Rings?
What is it like in the Shire?
It's peaceful.
Yeah. How do we know?
Because the hobbits sort of like are more preoccupied with like just the little fun daily lives in the village sort of thing. They're not worried about big I don't know. They definitely don't seem to be interested in big adventures. Most of the hobbits, right?
So would you say
they're just
happy there?
Definitely.
Okay, yes. So we know that life is good in the Shire because everyone pretty much seems happy there. And it's really cute, wouldn't you say? It seems like there's two jobs. There's carrot farmer and guy who works at farmer's market. So
yeah.
And we're talking simplicity and clarity of theme, right? So this is the world that we're trying to preserve and save, this life of simple, ordinary people. How weird would it be if... Well, there's also a lot of political corruption in the Shire. Also, in the Shire, they have slavery. Also in the Shire, Frodo's not sure he likes it that much. Wouldn't that really complicate the story? Because it's like, what are we fighting for? Why are we going through this whole
Right.
quest? Like, what's our basis? What are we trying to work back towards? Let's use another example because I know you maybe are not the biggest LOTR fan. How about Last of Us? That's another example that a lot of people know. So you know Last of Us.
Yeah, I saw most of the first season.
Oh, okay. So what's the basic arc of the character?
Um, so sort of going from, you know, like jaded to caring about this character that he's transporting.
Yeah.
You know, caring about this kid. Initially, it's more like, isn't it about trying to get a generator or something?
Whoa, what? No,
If
that's
I bring
okay.
this kid here, I get a generator. Or that's what it seemed like. I think in the first episode, it was like, all right, we'll give you the generator, but you got to bring this kid to the other city.
That's just a really small part of the first episode. It's not about a generator.
Okay.
But regardless, so he's doing a job basically, right? At first, he's escorting this girl from one city to another. But why does all this matter? He lost his daughter in the prologue. Remember?
Yes.
So he loses the daughter. So what if Joel wasn't sure he wanted to be a dad and didn't really like Sarah that much? Wouldn't it be a weird arc?
Yeah. Sarah is who is Sarah?
Sarah's his daughter.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
If in the intro it was like, I'm not really sure she's that great. I'm not even sure I like kids. And then he loses her. And then he goes on this whole journey. Then he bonds with Ellie. And then what were we fighting for? Like, what were we trying to get back to? It's murky because it's too nuanced. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
I have
that comes up a lot in go ahead.
I've sat through a lot of extremely nuanced films and film festivals that suffer from this issue.
Right. Exactly. So it's not to say that good stories don't have nuance. They do, of course. Movies have their own type of nuance. But in order for theme to really become clear, we need simplicity and in order to create that clarity. That's why I'm always talking about clean, beautiful character arcs that don't have this murkiness in them. Like too much nuance, too much of every time you're like, well, the character kind of sort of wants that, but he also sort of doesn't. But he also kind of hates it, but he also kind of wants it. Like, does Frodo sort of kind of want to save the Shire? Like, does Joel sort of kind of love his daughter? What are you talking about? Like, you have to have that, like, base level of simplicity and clarity for a lot of this to come through. So, like, in terms of clean character arcs, don't use too much nuance. Don't have your characters' opinions be, like, I know, and it's hard because in real life sometimes people do have these really complicated feelings like that. And if you went through the whole, like, of Joel and Sarah's relationship, you'd probably find a couple moments that weren't that great, right? But we don't include those in the prologue because those would muddy the theme. Like, of course they had some times they weren't getting along together, but we're curating such a small section of these people's lives to show. And in showing only a very small curated section of people's lives, you have to choose the ones that are going to build the argument that you want, which is, in this case, going to be about, you know, first he swears off of ever being close to someone loving again because he loses the closest person to him. And then through his journey and his trials and his bonding with this new person, he comes to see, you know, this person needs me. She could become my new sort of surrogate child, and I could get back to that happiness that I had before. But if we didn't have that happiness to begin with, it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, this is really great point. Like, I think some writers struggle a little bit because they're worried about their story turning out too cliche. Or I'm hitting them over the head with this. I want to be, but there's a difference between dumbing something down and sort of muddling it with too many different, ideas or concepts.
Right. Too many different perspectives, too many nuances, like, and like, I understand why people struggle with this because people in real life are very messy like that, and have very weird opinions, or like, sometimes if you have a character especially that's like, striving for one thing throughout the movie, maybe that person hates that thing now and again, or maybe people in real life would, sometimes you hate the thing that is your number one passion. But if you try to include, like, the more you try to make movies like real life, the more the theme can suffer, because movies aren't real life. They're a very curated, very short, like, slice of someone's, or like series of slices of someone's life. And that, in real life, isn't really trying to build a dramatic argument. Real life just kind of happens. But we are sort of being these curators and being these ones who we have to decide which slices of this person's life would go on towards towards making a specific point. I guess that's what I'm getting towards ultimately. Thank you for being my interrogation guinea pig. Maybe we have a question or comment from Dakota. Go ahead.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Awesome. So, first of all, I love this topic so much. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So glad this is happening. So, I've always thought about, especially when you're talking about nuance and complexity versus simplicity and things like that. When you're dealing with theme, I think it's important to really understand that just because a theme is simple, you can have nuance in the simplicity of matters, meaning that you can, as a painter does, right? And when you look at a Rembrandt painting, there are very broad strokes. He uses broad strokes to make something incredibly beautiful. And you can do the same thing with film. You can be very broad and still get everything you want to. You don't have to get into every single detail of every little thing, because Rembrandt did not do that. If you really study paintings, you see this a lot, where he doesn't do every single eyelash. He does just little bitty broad strokes that make the illusion of the eyelash. That's basically what you're doing here, is you are just getting across whatever the idea is, whatever the theme is, in the best way possible, using as many broad strokes as you can while still keeping it simple. Simplify, simplify, simplify. To quote my animation professor, simplify, simplify, simplify. That is all I have to say about that. Great conversation so far.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great contribution, and this does tie sort of into our earlier class a couple of weeks ago on that we're looking at paintings and talking about how many brushstrokes do you need to convey a certain image, because Bob Ross can do just a swoosh, and that's a whole mountain. And some people can spend a year on a painting of a mountain, right? So you do have to determine how many brushstrokes you actually need to communicate this idea, and the fewer, the better. Just given how movies work, it's such a short amount of time to be watching a story, and you can't guarantee people are going to pay that much attention through all of it. You don't know when someone's going to take a bathroom break or look at their phone or whatever. So not that we have to factor that into the story, but just you have to be able to tell it in as clear and simple of a way as your genres and your subject matter sort of allows you to. Thank you for the comments, Dakota. Here's a question from Luke. Do genres have dramatic arguments or themes? Romance being love conquers all. That's one of the big examples. Yep. My personal definition of Western is one man's law. I'm wondering if there are other genres have easy to convey themes. Yeah, I have a whole series of slides on it coming up. Okay, let's keep going. So, I'll skip through these slides a little bit, but these are abridged from the Craig Mazin episode of Script Notes called How to Write a Movie, which there's a link to in the slideshow. But we've covered a lot of this. It's just a concept or a topic, a theme, brotherhood, war. Not really, because there's not really an argument there. You're not really saying something intrinsically. That's like a topic. That's like a subject matter for the story. Is science a theme? No. But once you start making a clearer statement, something that actually could be argued either way, you're going to go ahead and make a case for this idea in your story. Think of this, right? Like, it's better to be dead than to be a slave. If you love someone, you have to set them free. These are arguments. These are things that aren't guaranteed to be true. Brotherhood, race, justice, revenge, these are just topics. And every story will have a topic and a theme, or multiple topics sometimes. Usually a movie has one topic. Books sometimes will have more topics, and ultimately this theme as well. That's more of the authorial statement and what the work is trying to ultimately say about that topic. The quality of an argument is not related to the quality of a script. It might seem a little cliche to have a very straightforward, easy theme, like, well, love is good, war is bad, but some of the best stories ever told have a dramatic argument that boils down to war is bad or love is good, right? Let's come back to this question of what are some of the themes of our favorite movies later, once we have built out more groundwork for how this actually works. So, first of all, is theme super important? I would say don't worry too much about it on your first draft through. You're not always going to have that really clear sense of what it is. Sometimes you're just like, I thought of a cool idea for a monster or a heist, or I thought of a really funny situation or character that I want to do a story about. And you can always start there. You can always start with, what if there was a movie about a green ghoul? Nothing wrong with that, especially when the green ghoul is at the heart of the high concept hook in the first place. Like, you should pretty much, in terms of high concept writing, be starting from the foundation of something cool that would look good on a poster, that would look good on a lunchbox. Like, you're trying to find something simple and easy to express, that's clear what it is, it's clear what kind of genre it is, and it's clear what kind of fun you would have in that story. So it's fine to start from that perspective of just what would just be fun, interesting, funny, scary, whatever emotional effect that you're going for is. That's always totally cool. This is more something that you're going to conceive in your second draft, and once you have that first draft really down, and you have the basics down, you can start to bring certain things out of it. It's not always going to become really apparent what that central dramatic argument is, and it's easier to sort of maybe finish the story and then kind of mentally audition a couple different dramatic arguments that might make sense given the pieces that you've laid out. And it could take a reader to really help you figure out what it turns out your story was kind of summing up to, or what point you were ultimately trying to make. Typically in the beginning, the story features a main character that believes in the opposite of what they're going to end up with at the end. This is like the kind of classic positive arc, though you might be able to tie that to a negative arc if your character starts the story as a good person and then ends up becoming a bad one or a worse one, for instance. You can totally do that. That's a downfall, right? A tragic downfall. Your Anakin Skywalker kind of arc. But in any case, most of the time in stories, we start with a character that's achieved that level of stasis and things not changing. They're in some kind of cycle of normality. Their ignorance of the theme may have gotten to this nice place in the first part. Like, think of Mr. Scrooge, right? He's an old miser who doesn't value or respect his employees. He doesn't care about his family, and he's just a douchebag, right? But that's gotten him to this point of stasis where he's rich and lives in his tower and, has a big Christmas goose every dinner and doesn't share with anyone. And he's fine with that. He doesn't think there's anything wrong with that. He thinks he's happy. Ultimately, stories about miserable people learning a lesson are going to often be about them not realize. It's like they have something they want, which is to stay in their comfort zone of the life they've built. And then ultimately they're going to sort of come to realize what they need, which is that point of the story. And a lot of the time, that intersection of what they want and what they need, or the way that one contradicts the other, is where you really start to clarify theme and dramatic argument in the first place. It doesn't mean they're happy in their stasis. They don't have to be happy. Their default could be miserable. Think of your Harry Potter or your orphan story, your Cinderella. Every day, once upon a time, there was Cinderella, and every day she would get beaten by her stepsisters while she scrubbed the floor, whatever it is, right? And that's her stasis. And depending on if they're happy in their stasis or not, that's going to really inform your catalyst, of course. This is a little outside of the realm of theme, but generally, if your character's in a place of stasis that they like, then the catalyst is going to be something that jeopardizes their place of happiness. Whereas if they're in a world they don't like, then the catalyst is going to offer them an opportunity out of their unhappy stasis. In any case, it's our job to disrupt that stasis with that inciting incident or that catalyst that shakes up their life and gets them into the action. But what kind of lesson are they going to be learning? How do we figure out what they need, how they need to start, and where they need to finish? So always, when doing high concept features, I do always come back to this just basic idea of what did you think? What was the cool thing you started with? If I started with just, well, wouldn't it be cool to do a mountain climbing movie? Then that's a fine starting point. Now, would climbing a mountain be scary, dramatic, and interesting to watch on screen? Yeah, of course. Are there a ton of mountain climbing movies? Not really. There's some, but like, I could totally see just starting from, I want to write a movie about mountain climbers, right? And then from there, that's why I call this the guy climbs a mountain movie. Is that we have the topic, we have the subject matter, we have the kind of adventure that we're on. It's going to be like a wilderness survival thriller, right? So the sort of man versus nature type of story. And then from there, we might imagine, okay, it's about a guy climbing a mountain. He's kind of conquering that mountain in a way, like he's sort of, surmounting the obstacles that it presents. What might be something that you would learn from that? Well, I guess to appreciate how difficult that was. So nature is to be feared and respected. Climbing mountains, very hard, right? And that might lead you to the path of, this is the sort of story algebra you can do at the very beginning of the process, right? If we're wondering, okay, he has to climb a mountain, he has to learn that nature is to be feared and respected. I have to ask, what's the inverse of that? Nature is not to be feared and respected. Okay, what do we do with it instead? Exploit it for profit? strip it bare and rip up the resources and line our pockets because, cha-ching, cha-ching, who cares about nature? That's where we sort of have to start. So if your character is going to go from go towards learning this lesson in your theme, this sort of thing that just jumped out of your mind of what would be like a clear, a thing that almost anyone would learn from a series of obstacles like this, and then ask yourself, what's the inverse of that? Who would have the hardest journey going through that? Who believes the complete opposite of that? So we're going to go with the fracking engineer. And then, so you might even think of this as starting from the basis of, okay, I want to do a movie about a guy who climbs a mountain. Who's the best hero for that? I don't know. A guy that hates mountains? Who hates mountains? Nobody really hates mountains, but a guy that maybe blows them up and gets rich off of that. After a rock slide strands and paralyzes him at the base of a mountain, a callous fracking engineer must battle wild animals and the elements as he climbs to the summit to find rescue. There we go. There's a log line that takes that basic idea of character that starts embodying the anti-theme, a callous fracking engineer. We've given him a situation where he's going to be forced to dig down deep and come to realize the enormity and the truth of the opposite of that initial idea, which is that nature is not to be exploited. You have to appreciate and come to protect it. Ultimately, is where we want him to end up. So maybe along the way he's gonna bond with an injured, bird that he nurses back to health. This is the City Slickers kind of dramatic argument. And then at the end he's like, I can't be a fracking engineer anymore because I healed my pet bird, and I can never harm the habitats that I've come to, intimately experience and appreciate on my own. It's a stupid story, but sometimes you have to look at the dumber, simpler ones to get that really, really just clear, straightforward idea. Now, we don't want to overcomplicate things. We don't want to, at the beginning, show, well, he sort of likes nature. He kind of appreciates it. He feels bad about being an engineer. No, that's muddying the theme. He doesn't feel bad about it at the start. He is completely airheaded hard-headed about this. He's never once considered the effect of the oil spills or the fracking or any of, the mining operations, the pollution in the streams, chopping down trees. That's all fine to him. He grew up in a family where that was normal. If we make it too nuanced at the beginning, remember, it won't come through clearly in terms of the simplicity of the arc. So don't overdo it. He hates mountains at the start, or thinks mountains are dumb and not worthy of respect at the very least. And through climbing this mountain, that is how he will gain that appreciation. So I won't linger on this too much, but that's just my dumb example of what is a very simple way to illustrate this, by starting with just, what is the character doing? What is the obvious lesson that could be learned from that? Or what would the takeaway be that an average person might gain from that? And then ask yourself, who embodies the opposite of that? And that's how you can sort of arrange that basic sort of story algebra at the very beginning of the process to figure out, well, where does the character start and where do they need to go? Any questions so far? No questions so far. Let's check the chats. Luke tells us in Fern Gully the guy's a lumberjack. Yeah, exactly. The big bad forestry corporation is going to chop down the rainforest, and so our central relationship love interest is he's not exact. I don't think he's framed as the protagonist, because I think, is it Crystal? Is that her name? The little fairy? That's our hero. But in any case, he basically has the central internal journey of the story, because he does the Avatar thing. He gets shrunken down to be a fairy size as well. He has a whole adventure with the fairies. He comes to see the beauty and natural, the value of their habitat and all the intricate workings of it and all the ecosystems, and he comes to appreciate and love it, and he splashes in a stream and he eats a big berry and all that kind of stuff. And then by the end, he's fighting against the lumberjack people because he has come to appreciate this way of life by living in it and by gaining that empathy and understanding through experience. So yeah, same, really simple, Last Samurai, Dances with Wolves, Fern Gully, Pocahontas, Avatar. That kind of outsider joins the noble savages would be like the kind of archetype of that story. Let's go into a theme by genre. So which themes are really clear or always, I'm going to start with some of the more obvious ones. Luke, why don't I just bring you up because you had this question before, if you're able to speak aloud on the mic.
Sure. What was my question?
Let's go into this idea of theme by genre, right? How about this genre?
Which genre is this? Christian? Oh,
Yeah.
the theme would be I don't know, Jesus saves, I guess.
Yeah, more than he saves, but it's. I mean, yes, he does, but because of that, we should believe in him, right? Like he's the answer. We should turn to Jesus. Like every person should turn to God because God will solve all your problems. Essentially, like He will. Even when things get tough, even when you are beaten down like Job, then you should find your way to God, and that's always going to be the dramatic argument in this genre.
Pretty much, yeah. All your problems are ultimately going to be solved by turning to God in the end.
Right, and no matter what twists and turns the story takes, by the end we always basically have to get there, or else we're not in this genre anymore. If there's too much, again, with too much nuance, if you're like, well, but God's kind of okay, you could choose which God you really want to believe in if you insist. Like, that's not a Christian
Oh,
movie.
no. Definitely not.
No, and there's other faith-based movies as well besides just Christian, but I think most Americans would be more familiar with this one. I'm sure there are also any religion you look at, there are stories that are intended to sort of espouse those really clear themes. So
I'm just thinking of an unfortunate side arc with a character named Aisha in God's Not Dead.
I've seen God's Not Dead, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of gross, but let's not talk about it.
Okay, we don't have to get into it, but basically, guess what the dramatic argument is? You gotta believe, dude. You gotta have faith. It's like the romance kind of thing, right? It's always going to end up with love conquers all. In this case, God is the answer.
Okay.
How about romance? We talked about this one.
How do these stories have to love conquers all.
Yeah, love conquers all, meaning what's the ending going to be like?
Well, I think one of these might not be a romance by that definition, but the ending is usually going to be happily ever after.
Yeah,
or
Brokeback Mountain is a romantic tragedy, so that's a little bit
or even
outside of this, yes.
I guess in the case of like Titanic, even with one of the characters dying, it's still like she still loves him for the rest of her life or whatever. It's still
exactly
a romance.
So that even although that is technically a tragedy too, it is more classical romance because they end up with not necessarily a happy, fulfilling relationship at the end, but she never forgets him and she always has that love for him. And although it's kind of about Rose letting that go at the end when she drops the locket into the ocean, it's kind of like this was that one romance that never got out of my mind that made me who I am, kind of. So there's not going to be a character who at the end is like, well, but I'm not sure I like this relationship that much. I mean, it's fine, I guess, except when we go to look at something, I don't know, like The Graduate or something like this, that's a deliberate subversion of the typical romance tropes. But for the most part, characters that struggle and sacrifice to be together are rewarded with a happy and mutually fulfilling relationship. That is how the genre works, right?
Exactly.
How can you make stories interesting if the theme is always the same?
What do you mean? It's infinite ways to do it. Just execution. I don't know. You can sort of cross one genre with another that isn't commonly done, or you can. I don't know. Why do people enjoy cheeseburgers that are the same every time they eat them? I don't know what to tell you.
You're spot on. All of that is very true. We like to see, like, part of the appeal of these stories, part of the reason people go to them is because they know what kind of feeling they want to have when they're done with it. Same with a cheeseburger. You want to, have a stomachache and regret your life after you're done with that, right? So we are signing up for a certain type of experience, and knowing the kind of dramatic argument that is tied to certain genres allows you to bake that into your process from the very start. But you know that because the audience is expecting it, and they already know what is generally going to happen, you have to surprise us with how it happens. I think that is ultimately going to be the answer to the question. How do we make stories interesting if we know how they're going to end? It's going to come down to surprise. We need to be surprised by something. It's not if it's not by what happens, then it's by how it happens, or the intensity of when it happens, or it happens in a way we've never seen before, or it happens with a person we never thought it would happen to, or any of those other things. You got to find the surprise, and that's really key to just making what might feel otherwise like more genres really work. Okay. Let's get a little more dig a little deeper, these next ones won't always have as obvious of a type of theme, but what kind of themes do action stories typically have?
A one-man army. I don't know. They're all about impossible odds, stunts. I don't know what the theme might be.
A lot of the time, action stories come down to the ideas of like the weak versus the strong, right? Like, don't mess with the little guy because you never know who you're messing with. That's a dramatic argument. Death Wish type stories that I know you're a big fan of, right?
Okay, right.
Or you can only push a man so far until he'll take matters into his own hands. Or
First Blood.
First Blood, sure. Like they drew First Blood, they pushed me too far. They just kept pushing and pushing until like everyone has a breaking point. And when you find some people's breaking points, you will be, they will annihilate you in your whole little town. So yeah, a lot of the time, action themes are going to revolve around questions of power. Who should have power? Who has the power to take from others or to get revenge on others? Revenge is another big area of action. Sort of asking things like, how far will you go to make things right? How far will you go to get justice or to punish someone that's done wrong? Think of True Grit, right? The wicked flee where none pursueth is the quote that opens that movie. And it kind of goes into this. Go ahead.
Would you consider Conan action?
Yeah, that's action adventure.
That's all about power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's tied to sort of the riddle of steel, in a way, which his dad brings up at the beginning.
Yeah, which is stronger, flesh or steel? Spoiler: the will is stronger.
Right, exactly. So, but steel also helps, it turns out. So, action stories almost always revolve around questions of power, and who has the right to take it, who has the right to get it back. When should you or should you not exert your power over others? So, not all of them. Like sometimes they will also tie into something else, right? Like sometimes they will have a romance subplot or something like that can sort of angle the theme in a certain direction. What about comedy?
Does comedy have one theme?
No, not one theme.
I mean, comedy is so many different things. Comedy is just whatever makes you laugh. I don't know what comedy is.
So we have different types of comedies, right? What do we have behind us? This is the let's think of the Apatow subgenre.
Okay. Fun and games. What's the theme of that?
Is there a movie called Fun and Games? Wait, what do you mean?
No, I'm trying to zero in on the theme. I don't know. It's characters struggling. It's like,
Yep.
I
Go ahead.
I don't know. I'm drawing a blank.
That's okay. So a lot of comedies are relationship-based stories, right? The Apatow subgenre are sometimes called the bro-coms, right? These are sort of the stories about friendship. Who should you be friends with? Which friendships are worth keeping, and which ones are toxic or bad for you in whatever way. Comedy almost always will revolve around characters that are geeks, losers, nerds, and underdogs. So often they will sort of be full triumphant subgenre of stories. They're not going to be about somebody who's big and strong crushing the weak. They're going to be about the little guy getting one over on the big guy against overwhelming odds, right?
Okay.
So especially if we're in the Apatow world, these are mostly centering on male friendships. Superbad is probably the clearest example of this. But all of them are. What's the other really big one? The sort of like the role models, everything with Paul Rudd. This is 40s. You're grown ups. Or not grown ups. What was it called?
Step Brothers.
Step Brothers also revolves around similar idea of like friends and family. So almost always comedies are going to be relationship stories, and they're going to be linked to themes of friends and family, and which relationships are good and which ones are not so good. There's a lot of exceptions, though, and spoof and parody movies are in their own sort of other world where they almost don't have dramatic arguments. Spoof movies are almost kind of laughing at the idea that they even need one. So within that specific subgenre, you have your own different sort of rules that are tied to it, and you can have in like a scary movie or something like that, you can like your dramatic argument can be fart joke. Like you don't have to have if you ended on if you're getting laughs in a spoof genre it doesn't matter what you're doing. Like literally, it's essentially the cinematic equivalent of clowning. If you're getting laughs, it's working. And then we have some other subgenres as well. We have like dramedies, which are almost always again going to be about family relationships. More so than Friends, dramedies are usually about families. We have dark comedies, which are sometimes have a little bit more like thriller style plot lines, where it's gonna like Weekend at Bernie's is almost like a thriller style plot.
Often involving death.
They often do, not always, but they dark comedies often can involve elements of death and destruction in these things.
8 heads in a duffel bag.
Right.
Weekend at Bernie's, you mentioned. Yeah, black comedy and death kind of go hand in hand.
Right, and those are usually still going to fall under that realm of like the fool triumphant. Even the dumb everyman, if he tries hard enough and if he learns his lesson, then he can still win against the big evil corporation or against the tough himbo with the six-pack. Seth Rogen can get one over and he can get the girl because he learns to be a better guy. And no, he's a lazy stoner, sure, but he learns what love means, and that's what that mean himbo with the six-pack will never have. So,
okay,
go ahead.
And when Harold and Kumar make it to White Castle, I'm sure it's not about the burgers. I'm sure they discover the meaning of life or whatever.
I actually, believe it or not, have not seen the first Harold. I saw the
second I haven't either.
Not the first one, but it's probably, the real White Castle was more than likely the friends they made along the way.
Exactly.
And that's one
I haven't seen it, but I've seen it. I've seen everything like it.
Right, exactly. The second one was pretty funny. Do I have one more slide for this? I do. We were talking about this. That's why I brought you up for this.
Oh, yeah, one man's law. So arguably, my definition of the Western is one man's law. It's about the protagonist sort of being in this lawless place and sort of having to impose his own code or his own system upon it. That's not always a he, but usually it's a he.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Westerns often do come down to themes linked to the idea of civilization versus chaos. And the main character representing often a force of one or the other, and then the antagonist embodying the dark version of the other thing. So if your hero is going to be a criminal, then we have who's your villain going to be?
Outlaw, obviously.
Did you say an outlaw, or did you say the law?
An outlaw.
An outlaw. So if your hero is an outlaw, you can have another outlaw as the villain, that's true. But I was thinking more in terms of if we're doing civilization versus chaos, then your hero is an outlaw, so your villain is like a mean sheriff.
You said
right?
Hero is the outlaw? My brain is malfunctioning.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
So
if the hero is the outlaw, then if the villain... Hold on, start over.
If the hero is the outlaw.
The hero is the outlaw, then the villain is the lawman.
Yeah, exactly. How do you make a lawman into a villain? I thought cops only ever did the right thing.
I mean, Copland, the corruption or whatever,
Exactly. Yes.
Or the way they enforce the law is too harsh or too whatever it is, or there's a million ways to do it, You could just do Outlaw of Yossi Wales, you're just a member of an enemy faction or whatever. You're just opposed, or the Hatfields and the McCoys. You're just a family that feuds against another family.
Mm-hmm.
And they can represent those sort of law or chaos ends of the spectrum.
Right. And it sort of just depends what the fun of that particular story is. It's similar with, you can look at medieval, like Robin Hood type stories too, right? How do we root for a criminal? Well, because good and evil are not tied to whether you follow the law. And stories like this revolve around these sorts of questions. They say things like, it's up to strong men to make their own law. Sometimes, like you mentioned, it's about laying down your own code of justice and imposing that on a harsh world. And that is kind of drawn to some extent, I think, from the very basics of what are people doing in the Western genre, right? They're settlers that are imposing their own, like this is a very classic American genre for this reason, isn't it? Because it's about taking that untamed, quote, wilderness and cutting a path through it, making your fortune from it, and staking your own claim in that world. And so the stories kind of take on that. They're not always going to be about man versus the environment. They can be, and man's relationship with the environment is a really big part of Westerns. And sometimes in a sort of racist way, lumping in like indigenous peoples with the big bad environment that needs to be tamed or conquered. We would see that in older westerns. It's like, we have to deal with all the various obstacles of this land, including rattlesnakes, dust storms, those pesky natives, droughts, and stuff like that. It's like, wait, go back. That's obviously not the best way to other people nowadays, but you can see how the genre just has these elements of laying down the law and carving out your own path and built into it based on just the essentials of this is about people trying to hack it in a harsh environment. Any other thoughts on this?
It doesn't always have to take place in the Wild West either. Sometimes, like, the West is just a blank sort of canvas for the Western to take place on, and it can take place. I think Brokeback Mountain takes place in the '60s. That's technically a Western. There's sort of like sci-fi Westerns that take place on like alien planets or. Judge Dredd, that's one man's law for sure.
Yep.
So there's definite crossover and with other genres.
Right. And yeah, you're not constrained necessarily to the initial setting and time period. There is a classical time period that is just, like, not very few genres actually have like regions and time periods associated with them. This is one of the few that actually does. But you're not strictly limited to that. And there are some really cool westerns set in Manchuria, in China, for instance, or Korea.
Oh, yeah.
The Good,
the Bad, and the Weird.
Yeah, that's one of the best ones. And there's a couple there's a couple more sort of Chinese westerns. There's one called Let the Bullets Fly, which is set in 1920s China, which is pretty cool.
Ghost in the Darkness takes place on the savannah. It's a kind of a western.
Oh, right, sure. You could, so African settings can sometimes have
and then
western vibe.
Australia, there's Quigley Down Under.
Yes, definitely. So, and yeah, I think I've seen one or two actually just straight up Australian westerns that you would think was set in America.
Oh, there's
almost.
a bunch.
What's the one with Guy Pearce? The Proposition.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
It's like it's just like a classic American western that just is set in Australia because it's like, their environment was just as lawless and ruthless. Okay, so and I have one more, and then so let's go to this, and then I will touch on I'll give some of my personal brand new tips on horror themes. What kind of themes do horror stories have?
Be afraid.
Cautionary.
God, there's too many horror stories.
But you're right. So you said be afraid, meaning they're cautionary stories a lot of the time, right?
Yeah. Or I don't know. Frankenstein and Dracula are sort of, I don't know, allegory. They can be political. They can talk about sort of current fears that people have, or current sort of. I don't know. I'm circling. I'm on the far edge of the solar system, I think.
No, I think you're on track. You're right. So they can. There's different ways to play this. Of course, we have, especially in this wave of the A24s and things like this, the modern social issues that are tied to horror stories, and that might be making dramatic arguments about different things that, different political ways that we can live or behave or make laws or things like that. They might be about culture in interesting ways nowadays that maybe we didn't always think they were. I think a lot of the early slashers and things like this were very moralistic and had a very clear sense of what message they were trying to send too, right?
I think a body horror is an easy one, because all body horror is secretly about getting old, I think.
Really? That's
fear of aging, fear of that kind of thing.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of that idea, but I think you're right. Or getting old or getting sick or things like that. Any of the ways that just you have no control over terrible things happening to your physical form. So yeah, horror stories are very often going to be cautionary in that they're saying, don't mess with this. Remember the first story ever told was Bear in Cave? It's kind of like that, right? Don't go in cave, because bear perhaps in cave. So a lot of them also are going to revolve around this idea of kind of like dark truths about real life. And it's going to be kind of giving us let me bring us to our next slide so I can find my words on this exactly. Horror allows you to have much bleaker and darker dramatic arguments than are typically palatable in other genres. the theme of a lot of slashers kind of ends up being this thing like evil never you can never kill evil, right? You can't kill it. Even in, what is it, Halloween Kills, everyone keeps going, evil dies tonight, but it doesn't die tonight. In fact, it never dies. You can shoot him 100 times, he keeps coming back. It's pretty nihilistic, this idea of no matter how much you fight, no matter what overwhelming force you bring against the villain, you can't kill them.
Is that the one that has the argument that evil doesn't die, it's merely transformed?
Maybe.
And it opens with jack-o'-lantern sort of shape-shifting into the other. I kind of like that one. If it's the one I'm thinking of. I don't know. I might be thinking of Halloween Kills. It's either Halloween Kills or Halloween Ends.
Okay.
I don't remember which one.
Yeah, I remember in the third one there is sort of another guy that is like teased to be like almost another villain. I don't remember exactly how it plays out because the third one was kind of confusing. But regardless, there's a lot of Halloween movies, and most of the time, a lot of these early slashers ends up being, not only do we have this built-in moralistic kind of puritanical idea of don't have sex or drink or do drugs or things like that, but also we are tied to this idea of you can't kill the bad guy no matter how hard you try. Some forces should not be disturbed. Some secrets are better left buried. And if you look at some things like classic Lovecraftian themes, the dramatic argument ends up usually sort of being you can only push back the evil for one more day, but it'll cost your life and your sanity, and eventually your struggle will have all been for nothing because you'll, at the end of the day, be crushed by the giant tentacles of God or fate. And stories like Stephen King's Pet Sematary sort of suggest this other very dark idea that maybe sometimes people are better off dead, and that when we refuse to let the dead or their memories rest, that we risk unearthing these dangerous and volatile forces beyond our control. So these are kind of like dark ideas and dark truths. Like horror acts, I think, primarily as an illuminator of dark truths. And I think that's where a lot of the best dramatic arguments are going to come from. These endings that aren't necessarily hopeful. We beat the monster. Now we win. In fact, you can almost see it as a little bit or some writers, and to some extent I see this too. This isn't the argument I make, but I see the point that it may be even a little disrespectful to some extent to even suggest that the villain in your movie, which might come to represent something like grief or addiction or something like that, can be so easily defeated as a protagonist that could do it within the span of a movie. Some horror filmmakers might sort of be like, no, of course they can't defeat it because nobody in real life can defeat loneliness like that. You can't kill depression. So, of course, the character can't either. They have to find some other way to live with it. We're looking for that kind of third other haunting ending that isn't necessarily we beat the bad guys, good job, but it's maybe they're still out there somewhere. Or maybe we didn't really kill them and we never could. Or maybe, maybe I don't know if I killed it or not, and I'm going to be waiting for it every day for the rest of my life. So any of these kind of like bleaker ideas fit really well into horror, and like the audience is willing to follow you to much darker places in horror than they are in most other genres. Even if it was the same basic story, in a drama you may have less leeway to go to the extent and say something like, what's like a really dark dramatic argument we could make? If someone's dragging you down, cut them out of your life, right? Could feel a little bleaker or happier depending on the exact circumstances, but ultimately that's like you might have to build a pretty dark story in order to convey that theme. And if there is a positive theme, like something ultimately happy, the character wins or beats the bad guy, most often it's going to be learned in a really costly or painful way, usually with them having to pay the ultimate cost in order to achieve it. Thinking of Train to Busan, the really clear theme of that movie is the core of love is sacrifice. A character basically says it at one point. The main character is a bad dad who has to learn to be a good dad by the end, and at the end he has to choose to end his own life to let his daughter live on, because he gets bitten by the zombie and they're on the train together. He's like, I have to jump off the back of the train now, despite the fact that he's been relentlessly selfish throughout a lot of the movie, and we've watched the sort of antagonist, the train conductor, make selfish choice after selfish choice after selfish choice. Then we watch the main character be forced to sort of get to this point where he has to decide between himself and his child's life. And he thus becomes that really clear embodiment of that idea while also paying the tragic cost of learning it at the same time. Any thoughts on this idea? Are you still on the stage? Go ahead, Luke.
I'm up here. Yeah, so I had something to say and I lost it. We were talking about oh my God, what was the example? I had an example that sort of does both of these things. So the character makes a sacrifice, and it wasn't the mist, though. That is kind of a horrifying ending.
It is, yeah. I'm not even. That's kind of a weird one. That one ends on such a shocking note. I'm not 100% sure what the dramatic argument is, but it's a great movie.
Oh, It. Stephen King's It. The kids, 30 years later, unite and use the power of love to defeat the evil fear clown from beyond space-time.
Right.
But the people in the town are the monsters. There's still monsters on Earth. Like, there will always be monsters or whatever. That's sort of, I think, the dramatic argument of It. It does sort of both things in a way.
Right. And although we do defeat the clown, the characters they don't defeat all the bad adults. But now that they have defeated the clown, we might imagine they're going to be more equipped for dealing with those evil people, because they've sort of built their bond and they've built their friendship in such a way that they've become this impenetrable, unit, that now that they've realized the power of friendship, they can never be broken up again or defeated. Ultimately a pretty hopeful ending, all things considered.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of food for thought here. I'm going to have to think about this.
Sure. Well, I can call you back if you have some more thoughts in a bit. Thank you for weighing in so far. So, let's continue on. Anti-theme we've talked about a little bit. Just to clarify exactly what we mean, remember, in the beginning the hero acts most of the time in accordance with the anti-theme. Or maybe you have another character that kind of embodies the anti-theme. It doesn't always have to be the protagonist. Usually it kind of does, but sometimes you have another character that might represent the path that the hero could have gone down, or runs the risk of going down, or even now still could potentially become if they don't learn that lesson. So if the hero themselves does not go from embodying the anti-theme to the proper theme, then we often will watch another character do that same thing. And sometimes the internal and external journey of the stories are even split. Think of V for Vendetta, in which V does all the external action and Evie does all the internal development. And though they sort of like meet in the middle, and V is inspired by Evie in his own way, it's like they're kind of the same character that's been split in two. Normally we would have the main character be the one that has to do the physical, interesting, visual stuff that advances them towards their goal. Whereas in that story, they're kind of the same character, but we're trying to get them to agree, or ultimately by the end, they realize, like, I'm kind of the same person, or I'm kind of, I can come to understand this guy from his own perspective, and I kind of love this guy in our own weird sort of not actually really romance kind of way. So yeah, character that embodies the anti-theme, Gollum and Frodo are another great example of this, where the whole story revolves around this idea that the simple, courageous, and humble acts of your average, ordinary people will pull us through and help us win. Gollum represents the greed and selfishness of ordinary people, right? That sometimes if you make the wrong choice again and again, it becomes tempting or addictive, and you get more out of it. You sort of you're pulled down the spiral of bad choices, and he physically embodies this little goblin dude. Obviously, he looks like a mutant version of a hobbit. And Frodo runs the risk of becoming like him, which makes such a perfect pair-up between Frodo, Sam, and Gollum all throughout Two Towers and Return of the King. Because we have the reason that Frodo can't get rid of Gollum, even though Sam keeps telling him to, we have to get rid of him, he's going to betray us. The reason Frodo can't cut him loose and get rid of him is because by giving up on Gollum, he would be giving up on himself. And the idea that if he gets rid of Gollum, it's like saying, I can never go back. So it's the perfect sort of like pair-up and connection of theme to anti-theme throughout that whole arc. It's basically a psychological thriller arc that runs from Two Towers all the way through end of Return of the King. So think of your story as a journey that guides your character from belief in the anti-theme to belief in the theme. If you have another character that embodies anti-theme, sometimes you might want to bring them up to the verge of, like, remember, Smeagol promised. Like, we give him that chance to learn the lesson, and he turns it down. Smeagol lied. To guide your character to a better way of living, they're going to be continually challenged during that Act 2 until finally in Act 3 they're going to realize the truth that they've been ignoring and choose to embrace the theme and act in accordance with it and sort of show their work by transforming and demonstrating the ways they've changed. Or if it's a tragic arc, then they will turn away from it at the last moment and they will choose otherwise. Or it could always be that they learn the lesson but they fail at the end. You can find any sort of combination of those things and build a more specific dramatic argument any way you want. Just looking at the last moments of a story can sometimes really clarify what that story was trying to say, and you can almost always change the ending or change those last few moments to drastically change the meaning. I was thinking of the ending of Thelma and Louise, which I have up here, and a similar one that I actually saw recently was The Whale, the Darren Aronofsky movie starring Brendan Fraser. It has sort of a similar thing. I won't go into too much specifics on it just because I know maybe some haven't seen it yet. But let's just look at the lesson that we can learn from the Thelma and Louise ending. So Thelma's a housewife married to a controlling, disrespectful guy. She's ignored and disrespected and pushed around by men. And when a man tries to assault her and her best friend outside a roadhouse, she shoots him with a gun, doesn't believe that they're going to get a fair trial, so she goes on the run with her best friend. After many trials and adventures, they're finally cornered by the authorities on the edge of the Grand Canyon. Rather than be captured, Thelma proposes, hey, what if we just keep going? And they hold hands, and Louise slams the gas, and they zoom off the cliff, presumably to smash on the ground and die. But the movie doesn't end with them smashing on the ground and dying. It ends with a freeze frame of the car in midair, as if it's flying to heaven, right? What could the dramatic argument be here? Why would you end there? What are we depicting or communicating by choosing to end it like that? Dakota, go ahead.
Welcome to the film that I studied a lot. Yay! So,
Thelma head.
yeah, so Thelma and Louise. So I think that when it comes to the ending and why they ended it here, it's almost like the same reason why you would end, in a way, Grease, right? Grease ends with the car too. I think that it can imply different things. It depends on your moral outlook. It allows the audience to kind of decide for themselves. Logically, I mean, if this were to keep going, it would just continue to fall. I mean, you're not going to jump off the Grand Canyon. This isn't, you're not Evel Knievel, right? Or The Simpsons, But because it's a freeze frame, it allows the moment of it literally suspends belief. Like it suspends that. So it kind of gives the opportunity of maybe there's a chance they could live somehow, or if they do die, maybe it is a hopeful thing because death is just a doorway into something else anyway. So there's a lot of different things to think about, but it really all comes down to how does the viewer see it. They kind of just left it open-ended because, like everybody's going to see it differently. It just depends on who you are and, what you think about this kind of thing. So many movies do this. A Touch of Zen from 1972, the first Kung Fu movie does this. Same idea, where the ending is just kind of, ambiguous, and it just allows you to think about what if this? Why if this? All of those lovely questions that, psychologists like to pose at you. So yeah, it really does. It's supposed to make you think, even though logic dictates otherwise. It allows you to think of the opposite, or if you do follow logic, a hopeful way or a pessimistic way. It really does depend on how you think about it.
And in a story that's all about freedom, or this topic of freedom, right? This idea of I don't I'm tired of being pushed around at home. I'm tired of being abused and oppressed. And so now I'm going to go find my own type of freedom or make my own type of freedom. The last frame sort of allows us to live in that freedom rather than saying, and then it all comes crashing down at the end and it was all for nothing and they died and it's fire and carnage and death, right?
Exactly. That's the whole point of these things, for sure. I mean, yep, hope. Yep, exactly.
Here's what the writer,
exactly.
Callie Corey, says about it. Okay, the ending is symbolic. We did everything possible to make sure you didn't see a literal death. You don't see the car land. You don't see a puff of smoke come out of the canyon. You're left with the image of them flying. They flew away, out of this world, and into the mass unconsciousness. Women who are completely free from all the shackles that restrain them have no place in this world. The world's not big enough to support them. I love that ending and love the imagery, and after all they went through, I didn't want anybody to be able to touch them. So the ending represents not like punishment for them. The movie isn't really like punishing them for what they've done. It's kind of celebrating what they've done. It's like a kind of radical ultimate fulfillment, as we sum it up nicely in this Atlantic article. Thank you for the thoughts, Dakota. So, questions on anything we've talked about so far? Michelle, go ahead.
Hey, you still there?
Go for it.
Okay. I just can't see you. Okay. Well, I just want to know, is it possible to have a situation where you're subverting theme? Like, I mean, I know we have anti-theme and there are anti-heroes like Batman and Taylor Swift. I'm just kidding. I'm just thinking of her song. And you showed anti-theme with Frodo and Gollum. And but I'm wondering if and I wrote this earlier, but it's been long past. But I'm wondering if, let's say you wanted to write a romance movie where it doesn't end. They don't end up together. Like 50 Shades of Grey, they didn't end up together. And you don't know that they're going to get back together, so if you have to stay together to be a love story, then it's not. But what if that's it? What if it's a standalone and they don't get back together, or what if good doesn't conquer evil? What if evil wins? What if the devil wins? What if the Nazis win? Or what if you write a comedy and it's purposefully not funny, and that's what and that is what makes it funny, but it's not funny, and that's why it's funny. So like a subversion and non-subversion, or an action movie that where the good guy doesn't win, the bad guys win. Indiana Jones, he doesn't get his hat back. The Nazis win, And I'm just wondering because, and I know this is more popular like in Chinese movies where, like at the end of fighting, Crouching Tiger, Fighting Dragon, I think that's what it is. Anyway, the person ends up jumping off a bridge at the end of the movie. American Fiction's ending, okay, springtime for Hitler in Germany. Well,
go ahead.
So anyway, I'm just wondering, can you do things like this and be taken seriously? Yeah. Not including the comedy that's bad, that's why it's funny, but other things like in Chinese cinema, where, maybe the lovers follow, they don't ever get back together, or the devil wins, or the Nazis win, or whatever, you know?
It's a good question. Can you deliberately subvert the type of theme that your genre would normally have? And yes, you can. Everything's been attempted, and some things have been pulled off. Like obviously, writing a comedy that's deliberately not funny is so big a subversion that, for most people, that would not work at all. But I have seen at least one movie that I would almost describe that way. So it has been tried before.
Is it Ishtar?
Is it what?
Is it Ishtar?
No, I haven't seen that. I'm not sure about that one.
My sister thought it was so funny, and we went to go see it, and Mom and I looked at her like, we looked at each other like, what? These are two people that are, the Dustin Hoffman and Noel, no, Beatty. What's Beatty's first name? Anyway, he's the brother of what's that actress? The one that he talked to dead spirits and stuff, anyway,
Not
but
sure. Somebody in the chat can look it up for us, I'm sure.
yeah,
But
well,
so to answer your question, to go back to this idea, can you deliberately subvert the ending? Yes, you absolutely can. If you're going to do that, usually that's the whole point of the story, is that you did that, though. And we could take, for example, something like La La Land, which is a pretty popular
love La La Land.
musical, yeah, from 5 or so years ago, and it sets you up. It makes it feel like this big classic Hollywood romance. For a lot of it, it sort of builds the expectation and sets all these promises for the type of romance that it will be, only to at the end say, wait, but life's not really like that. They don't big spoilers for La La Land. Things don't end up all tied together with a bow. And that's the point. That becomes the dramatic argument of that movie, which is that life isn't always going to be like a Broadway show. You have to roll with the punches and accept, and deal with the idea people will grow apart over time. Not every romance will be all sunshine and rainbows, and ultimately we're left on this very melancholy kind of bittersweet note at the end, which is a very specific tone for a romance to go for. And you can see not everybody would like that. And I'm sure a lot of people who were expecting a traditional romance were not happy with that ending at all. That's not
Yeah,
to say,
I
go ahead.
wasn't. I was hoping she would stay with him. I mean, you barely saw anything about her husband. I mean, he obviously was able to provide her a great financial living, but so could her boyfriend.
Right.
I mean, I think I would have stayed with the boyfriend just because I would said, "Oh God, he's such a great musician, and he's a good boyfriend. He just has to be out on the road,
Right. But even if those
Splendor
things
and
are true, sometimes it doesn't work out, and that's kind of what the movie was going to say, right? Like that is that kind of the point of this story as opposed to every other story.
right, exactly.
So you can definitely do that. You can definitely say, I'm going to build up an expectation, and then at the last second subvert that promise and not deliver that promise. But if you do that, what you do deliver has to be better in its own way. It has to be something that,
Right.
like, if you are making it unsatisfying on purpose, then something else has to be satisfying about it. Like, it has to ring truer than it would have otherwise. And that's kind of what I think La La Land was doing. It was sort of saying, like, this is what you can take away from this story. Like, it's fun to fantasize about life being like this, and many people who are dreamers come to expect things to be like they are in the movies, right? But then when you're hit with the reality of what it's really like, you can't live in La La Land for your whole life. So it builds a different type of theme, and you can definitely do it. You have to be aware that you are doing it, and you have to basically use that subverted expectation, that rug that you pull out from underneath the audience. Whatever's underneath the rug has to make as much sense, or it has to you have to do a little extra work. You have to make sure that the thing that we end up with, it's not what we wanted, but it's better than what we wanted, or at least it's more nuanced than what we wanted in a way that it builds a clearer, more distinct point. Like you're saying, this story is not like that. Here's why. So you just have to have that clear idea of here's why. If you subvert it for no reason, and you're like, and at the end of the the romance story, they blow each other up with bombs. I don't know, like something weird and crazy. Where it's like, I don't know, the main character becomes a vampire.
Well, that might work. That might work, and but that would I would watch that. But like my horror script, about the cannibalistic serial killer. I really don't want her to be found. Now this would be the first script I'm writing. And I only have 2 ideas for scripts, which I know you say you have to write at least a dozen before you really know how to write a script. And I understand that. So I'm obviously going to have to write at least, a dozen more before the 2 scripts I want to write about the 1900 hurricane in Galveston and this, and my horror script. But like in the, like I said, in the horror script, I don't want her to be found. I want it to be I want it to be that she's always out there. You don't know when she's coming back. And anyway.
Yeah, that in horror is not, in the horror thriller world, is not exactly a subversion, but it works. It still absolutely works. Like we've seen lots of stories where the killer gets away and is still out there, or has not been brought to justice in whatever way. And we're pretty used to it in those genres. It's not to say that it's the wrong move. You can totally do that. But in certain other genres, what if it was like a police procedural, and then the villain gets away, or a mystery where we never learn the answer to who did it?
Right.
That you have to be really careful with. If it's like one of these core assumptions about how the genre works, like a comedy will be funny, a mystery will have the answer. Like if you subvert the most basic assumptions about the genre, then you run the risk of losing your audience, even if what you did basically did work.
Okay. Well, and what I would what I would like to do is, like I said, I'd like to do that, or even have the police detective who finds her realizes that she's guilty, and they ride off into the sunset, or they go to Argentina, together, and you're just thinking, wait, what? He caught her, she's guilty, and yet they're going, to Argentina. Well, it's kind of like, the end of Basic Instinct, where she reaches down, you see the ice pick underneath her bed, she's guilty. And yet the detective and she are going to build a happy life together.
Right.
It's like, how long, I wanted a second one. I wanted him to be her next victim, not because I didn't like him, but just so, it's like a serial killer who's going to reform. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, it's all a prank.
Right. So there's all kinds of ways that you can subvert expectations. You just have to be really clear that that's what you're doing, and you should just know the effect of that. And you have to know what the audience wants before you can say, I'm not going to give them that. I'm going to give them something better.
Okay. And, like I said, if it's going to be like my very first one, I'm sure that if I do subvert expectations, I'm going to have to let it be seen where it's unlikely that, or rather that I'm going to have to set it up from like either in the beginning or at least midway that, that we're not completely thrown off guard when this happens. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. But but then again, what if, for people who don't like predictable endings, who say, it's predictable,
Yeah, we like, it's tricky. The perfect ending is both surprising yet also inevitable. It needs to have, and those things contradict each other, because if it's inevitable, how could it be surprising? And if it's surprising, how could it be inevitable, right? And that's just the challenge of writing a really good ending, is that finding a way for it to be both.
Oh, okay. Well, I really do appreciate it, and
no problem. Thanks for the questions.
Maybe you can give me ideas for the other 10 scripts I'm gonna have to write before I can actually write a decent one. Because right now I'm just sort of like, the only thing I could think of is writing scripts for the books I want to write. That's all I can think of.
That's fine. You got to start somewhere. So just get the first few out of your system and see. I'm sure you'll have more ideas, but you just got to power through.
I really appreciate you letting me talk so long. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for the questions, Michelle. All right. So let's move into the last couple. We have half an hour left. I have a couple more slides I could do. I think I want to just do this last two here. Then we'll go into exercise. Then we'll go into open lab and questions. And you can ask whatever question you want about whatever you're working on. You can bring up problems that you're having in terms of theme or dramatic argument, or anything else. Luke suggests a slasher where no one dies. Oh, you mean Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory? Just kidding. Several of them definitely die in Willy Wonka. Okay, so morals. Is a moral a theme? Oh yeah, moral is a type of dramatic argument. It's a very sort of simplified version of a dramatic argument. And not every story has to have what we would classify as a moral. Usually a moral is going to be a lesson, often in terms of cautionary statement, if this is like a fairy tale or kid's story. Let's start simple. Just name a fairy tale. What's the moral? And I'll check the chat on this one. Weekend says, Goldilocks. Okay, what's the moral of Goldilocks? I pitched a whole Goldilocks horror movie a few classes ago. Luke says, Tortoise and the Hare. Slow and steady wins the race. Easy. Yes, it is clearly established by that story that although the rabbit thinks he's going to win, he gets overconfident and runs really fast and then gets tired and falls asleep. And the turtle's able to surpass him and win. That's a lesson about life. Slow and steady wins the race. Super simple, right? What else? Brothers Grimm, Little Red Riding Hood. Don't talk to strangers. Be wary of people. Also, grandmothers should use proper courier systems instead of children. True. I'm seeing a suggestion, Goldilocks moral, don't be greedy. Yeah, that could be part of it. I've often seen Goldilocks summed up as sort of like having respect for other people's things. Don't take stuff that, don't steal or break into people's homes, says Megan. Willy Wonka, be good or drown in the chocolate river. Yeah. For Willy Wonka, it comes very much down to be honest and have integrity, or else you will be drowned in the chocolate river too. And that's why Charlie's ultimate test at the end was the sort of unspoken test, the simplest one of all. He returns the everlasting gobstopper to Willy Wonka. And thus he passed a test that he didn't even know he was embroiled in. Dakota, Hand of Midas, of the Midas touch, be grateful for the things that you have. Yes, what does Midas wish? He wishes that everything he touches would turn to gold. But it turns out that there's a danger associated with that as well. If everything you touch turns to gold, then you have to, what is it? Be careful what you wish for is one of these classic ancient morals. Nacho says, Red Riding Hood, can't trust anybody, not even grandma. Well, that's a very dark interpretation of that moral. Luke says, what's the moral of Jack and the Beanstalk? Buy shady goods from weirdos because it'll make you rich. I think that story is about the haves and the have-nots, and it's kind of like don't hoard stuff or else little people will find a way to take it from you. So I would actually flip that one to think of more of it from the giant's perspective. Unlike the normal kind of cautionary tale, the main character doesn't really get punished in the same way in Jack and the Beanstalk. It's more of like an adventure-style story where the hero, it's like underdog triumphant at the end. But if we look at it from the giant's perspective, they were living up there with everything, with all this treasure and food and stuff, while down below the little people didn't have anything. They were in poverty. So it's kind of like don't hoard treasure. That's my take, at least. If you have a different idea on Jack and the Beanstalk, let me know. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, suggests Megan. That's interesting, too. Yeah, sort of like saying sometimes you have to leave home and go on a big quest in order to get the things you need to move ahead in life. I'm not sure if there was a rule about how he wasn't supposed to climb the beanstalk or whatever, but maybe that would factor into things as well. There was a fairy tale called Shrek that was like, love yourself and others will love you. Yeah, Shrek is all about self-acceptance and letting your freak flag fly, if you go by the musical lyrics. Shrek ultimately has the opportunity, this is in the second one, to turn into a human, right? In the same way that Fiona has in the first one. But Fiona accepts that she is an ogre. This is who I am, and I don't care that I look like what normal people consider to be ugly, because I'm being my authentic self. And a lot of coming-of-age and teen-type stories have similar themes about accepting who you are. Like, obviously, you want to change the bad things about yourself, but there's always this idea that you have to find you have to accept the things you can't change, basically. And although they ultimately could change them, it sort of ends up in Shrek like they shouldn't have to change who they are. Luke tells us in Dumbo the magic comes from within. Yeah, is that the one where we clap our hands if we... No, that's Peter Pan, actually, where we clap our hands if we believe in fairies and then we can fly. So you can see that morals are just like a really simple way of laying out what a dramatic argument is in the most basic possible way that sort of gives you a directive and kind of an actionable thing to do at the end, or not do. Don't do this or do this. Care for others who care for you. Don't go out after midnight and disobey your parents. Things like this. And it's very easy to imagine how we might change just basic elements of fairy tales to get a completely different lesson, right? whether you change the motivation behind why the characters are doing something, or you change what the obstacles are, change what's in the way, change the outcome, change the ending, you can very swiftly and diametrically change what that story ends up really being about. Dakota mentions the hedgehog in the fog. I've never heard of that. Is that a fairy tale? It's sometimes okay to get lost in nature, but always know where you're going in the end and follow the buddy system. Okay, so kind of like another cautionary type story about going wandering. Three Little Pigs is the same as the ant and the grasshopper. Yeah, Three Little Pigs. That one is one of those that's a little more up to interpretation, depending exactly how it's told. I'm not quite sure what the dramatic argument of Three Little Pigs is by default. Maybe some people in the chat have ideas. Let me also make sure to check the stream chat, make sure I haven't missed any comments before I move on to our last few slides. Don't think so. Well, if you are watching on Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, or any of those other places, YouTube, you should come join us on Discord if you want to come join many more classes like this. You can go to scriptcamp.net and get that link to join our server by clicking the Discord icon right there in the top right and participate live in these discussions, workshops, and classes. Just thought I'd mention. Okay, so let's look at our last couple slides here. Villain as counterpart to hero and torchbearer for the theme. A strong villain is often some version of the hero, or they represent an aspect of the hero or an avenue the hero could take, or some diametrically opposed viewpoint to the hero, or what they could become if they succumb to the dark side. This conflict and this contrast can encompass that central dramatic argument for the movie, which is where we stumble upon such wonderful cliches as we're not so different, you and I, Mr. Bond, and things like this, right? What is it that Indiana Jones's rival says in the first movie? You and I are very much alike. Archaeology is our religion, yet we have both fallen from the purer faith. Our methods have not differed as much as you pretend. It would take only a nudge to make you like me and push you out of the light. Or what is that, the Batman and Joker kind of thing, right? Joker's like, you're not so different from me, Batman. You're a crazy guy in a costume that goes around beating people up, same as I do, except you're doing yours out of some misplaced sense of control over the world, and I'm just the version of you that accepted that you can have no control over the world. Or things like that, right? The idea that the villain represents not just a person that's opposing the hero, but they represent a sort of ideology that is opposing the hero's ideology. And the conflict between them, especially in action-adventure stories, but not exclusively in action-adventure stories, the, quote, death of one or the other represents the death of that ideology, or the victory of one of those characters over the other represents the fact that their motivation or rationale or cause or anything else is stronger than the other one. You could have a story where evil just ends up being stronger than good and evil wins. Then that would be the whole point of that story. Nacho tells us, Bluebeard, Golden Goose, and Golden Egg, various folktales about shape-shifting wife. The moral is curiosity killed the cat. Yeah, Bluebeard's Bride is this one where it's the classic gothic story where she gets taken into the rich guy's house as his new bride, and he's like, there's certain rooms you should never go into, and she goes into the rooms, and like the former wives are all in those, are locked up in those other rooms or whatever it is. Yeah, curiosity killed the cat. Could be a way of looking at that. Don't poke your nose where you're not supposed to. Sort of moral. But I'd be thinking about this, how to use the villain as this inversion of the theme, and how you can present the villain's ideology in a way that it has to make sense. That's the tricky thing here, and the one that sometimes people skip over is this idea that you actually have to pitch the villain's ideology in a way that makes sense to you. Like if what the villain is doing doesn't make any sense to you and is not something that you could even see doing, even if you were cracked and broken and evil and wicked and malicious in the way that they are, then you've got to find a different angle, because the villain should be right about something. That's going to be a lot of the strongest villains. They have to have some kind of point. If they don't even have a point, if they're just wrong, clearly and demonstrably wrong, then it becomes a nuisance to deal with them, not something that requires us to dig deep into ourselves and say, okay, fine, maybe you're right. Maybe the police do go too far sometimes, Mr. Criminal, but we'll work on that. We'll reform that. We'll stop having bad cops. We'll root out the bad cops from the department. But you can't say all law enforcement officers deserve to die. That's crazy. Like, the villain has to have some kind of good point. that they can argue that the hero is forced to grapple with. If it's a dumb point or one that makes no sense, then the hero won't be forced to grapple with it. They're just like, oh, some crazy guy's blowing up buildings, I guess we have to stop him. It's not going to be like, I have to change as a person in order to find it in myself to overcome that adversary. Andrew mentions villain in Black Panther being an example of that. Good point. Yeah, I have him right here in the middle. What does he say? Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors who jumped from ships because they knew death was better than bondage. Like, how do you argue with that? This villain really did require the main hero to dig very deep in order to specifically figure out how to pitch this idea that the villain's wrong. Like, the harder the villain is to argue with, the more that your hero usually has to change in order to defeat them. We have a question in the chat. I assume this does not apply to natural disaster movies where it's a force of man versus a force of nature. It can. I mean, for instance, there's trillions of books written about Moby Dick and things like this, where the whale sort of represents an aspect of Ahab himself. So the way that you might sort of frame the natural obstacles in those movies is as of extensions of your character's psyche, in which case those sort of other forces would sort of represent them battling with parts of himself. Does that make sense? Otherwise, there are other ways that you can frame villains in survival man versus nature stories. Usually, if there's a team working together, then those other characters can become antagonists, even if they're not working against each other. They just have different views on how they should, attempt to extricate from their situation. So it could be that the guy in charge of the lifeboat that's like, we're going to have to start eating each other, is the antagonist of your story, even if he has the same general goal as your hero, which is survive. So you might, for certain sections or for longer stretches, sometimes be able to frame human antagonists within man versus nature stories, but if you don't, then usually that nature comes to represent part of the character. Luke says Magneto's a good example of the villain who's arguably the good guy. Yeah, he certainly sees himself as the good guy. What is it that Pyra says to him in X2? They say you're the bad guy. And what does he say? Is that what they say? Like, he's got such a prepared speech about it. You are a god amongst insects, and never let them tell you otherwise. That is a wonderful scene because it totally makes sense, the allure that Magneto's position has, and the fact that he is not coming at this from a position of terrorism and chaos and things like that. He's fighting a war in his mind that has already started. And he's looking for allies to join him in this fight that he views as ultimately righteous. And the thing is, he's a Holocaust survivor. How can we even say he's wrong, that humans will always destroy what is different to them or the other? They're always going to try to crush and control the other, is his whole point. And he's categorically right. And that makes the heroes always have to come to terms with this question in themselves of how can I fight against somebody who's clearly right? And that makes their positions stronger. If your villain is coming at the story from a perspective that doesn't make any sense, it makes your heroes seem almost lame for defeating them because they didn't have to deeply examine why they're doing what they're doing. You can have the occasional crazy, out-of-control villain or something like this, but then you have to build out your dramatic argument very differently. It's not going to be usually a story that requires your heroes to drastically change if the villain isn't right about anything. Okay, so we're down to our last 15 minutes. I think I'm going to skip the exercise and move into Open Lab. So you can ask whatever questions you want about whatever you're working on, ideally as it pertains to theme and dramatic argument. Let's open the floor. Merrickson, go ahead.
Well, it's me, Cole. Can you hear me?
Go for it.
Hey, Connor. So is it? I missed the lab earlier. But my question was, is it possible for the theme to show itself in like the last, 3 minutes of the film? Like I was analyzing Night of the Living Dead, where it makes a very poignant message, I guess, at the very end of the movie where the protagonist is shot and killed. What do you think of that? Is that possible? Should we aim to do that, or
It's a good question. Can the point be made in just the last few minutes? I would say yes, but it gets harder, and it's a trick you can pull. It's not always going to work, though. Typically, we have to be having the movie's having a sort of conversation with itself, or you, the author, are having this conversation with yourself, and that you start with this thesis, and you argue with that thesis, and your character is forced to change to become the antithesis, or the synthesis, of who they used to be with what they've learned, and things like this. And then we watch them grapple with that and change around the 75% mark, and then approach the finale using the tools they've gained or learned along the way, and things like this. It's not the only way to do it. There are occasionally examples that work where just within the last couple seconds or a couple minutes or anything like that, the theme fully crystallizes or clarifies. I'd be really careful with that. And Night of the Living Dead is also a weird example because that theme almost emerged accidentally, considering that it was blind cast. He was just casting like friends and family and stuff like that, but it sort of ends up making a point that he may not have exactly meant to make, but it does work. So that's an odd example. Go ahead.
Could I give you the example of like Citizen Kane? How the very end, like it sort of crystallizes with the rosebud, and it all kind of makes sense. Is that a good example, or?
You're gonna make me admit I haven't seen Citizen Kane on live on air. I haven't seen Citizen Kane, sadly, but.
Oh my god!
Yeah, roast chat as you please. But generally, yeah, it is possible. But for like at least the last 20 minutes of the story, we're gonna kind of have really clear expectations about where it's going, and whether you land on that or subvert that, like, is up to you. But I would say usually this is I would say sometimes this works in mysteries where the reveal is only at the very end, or like the central question is only answered at the last second or something like that. But usually we have a little space at the of epilogue for us to grapple with. What does it mean that's the answer, or what does it mean that we will never know the answer, or something along those lines. What's the Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri might be another good example of the theme only really comes together in the last minute or two, because we're spending a whole movie looking for this criminal, and then towards the end we sort of realize, wait, we're not going to get him. But that's the whole point of the story, in a way. I feel like if you're going to do that, that has to be the whole point. Like, it carries more weight and is harder to make that work. But if you do, then it has to be really laser focused on making one specific point. Otherwise, there's just not that much reason to attempt to pull it off that way. It's a really challenging prospect, but it's a good question. I haven't really thought about it too much before. What do you think?
I think, I think it's possible. Again, I use Night of the Living Dead as a very early example of that. But I guess that was also by accident, like you said. And it also coincided with Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. So
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, maybe it's possible, but I guess it's more the exception.
Right, yeah, it's definitely the exception. It's going to, like, if you're going for the big shocker kind of ending, it can work, or like some big reveal at the last second. Or what is it? Soylent Green maybe is another example of this. Soylent Green is People is only at the very end of the movie, isn't it?
Oh, right, yeah.
So maybe that's another one where just in the last couple seconds it becomes clear, and you're going for like a very specific kind of gut punch, I would say.
Right, yes, thank you. Yeah, probably a gut punch. Right.
So that's when you want to surprise us with the theme and hit us with it, and then it's over. So we don't have that much time to grapple with it or wonder what it means. It's kind of the equivalent of cut to black, no credits.
I see, yeah.
So possible, but very tough. That's how I would sum that up. Thank you for the great question. I always like a new question I haven't tackled with before. Grappled with. I see a question in the chat. How is Darth Vader good? I wouldn't say Darth Vader is exactly good. I would say Darth Vader has a tragic downfall, which we talked about just the other day in Sci-Fi Group. He isn't good, but he has good intentions to begin with, which is to save somebody that he loves. And then he's willing to do anything for love, even turning evil or hurting others. And then by that point, he's so warped and twisted by having lost the thing that he loves that he latches on to the only thing that he has left, only relationship that he has left, which is his mentor, Palpatine. And so he falls into that toxic, unhealthy version of that codependent relationship that he was in with Padme. So yeah, I wouldn't say Darth Vader is good, or Anakin is even good. he was selfish, but selfish in the name of love. It's a way we almost can't blame him for entirely, and that's what makes an interesting, nuanced villain. That's nuanced in the right way, not too nuanced in the sense that, well, he's not sure he likes Padme that much. No, yes, he is. It's a perfect true love, right? Similar to Princess Bride. Do we ever question, well, but, should Wesley and Buttercup really be together, though? I'm not sure she even really likes him that much. I mean, she had another crush in the village, too. No, she didn't. He was the perfect farm boy. Like, we can't be muddying the arcs with too much nuance. Whew. Okay. Anyone else? Feel free to raise a hand, ask for a question with your story that you're struggling with, or any questions based on what we've talked today in the realm of theme and dramatic argument. Luke, go ahead.
Do you have examples of movies or shows where sort of the point is to have, I don't know, chaos and muddiness, and the, sort of the dramatic argument is muddy and messy, sort of deliberately?
Yeah, so American History X is one that I often go back to for this. Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Okay.
So you remember the ending?
Okay, which ending? There's like 3 endings. Hold on.
The very ending. The last one.
With which character?
When with
It's
Danny.
been like decades. Danny, just refresh me. It's been too long.
Okay, so the whole movie is about a really terrifying, violent, racist, white supremacist who needs to change, right? And he goes through a big transformation. And he does not exactly the Fern Gully thing, but similar to the Fern Gully thing, where it's like, now that he becomes institutionalized with all these other people that he, it's his first time going to jail and stuff like this, he makes a black friend in jail. And he ends up saving his life. They end up saving protecting each other, saving each other in there.
I remember. So he comes out, he's fully reformed, and then his, I guess, kid brother or whatever, sort of the cycle continues with his brother.
Yeah, we're working up to this point where so Derek and Danny are the characters. Derek is the older one. And Derek gets out of jail. He's trying to reform his brother now, but he sees his brother sliding down the same slippery slope that he used to fall down. And he spends a lot of time trying to change his mind and try to say, you don't need all that stuff anymore. I changed and you can change too. And then at the end, he gets shot by a black student at school. And our main character, and we don't see what happens to the main character after that. And for all the lessons that we learned, like compassion and empathy and all these things, that seems to almost deliberately fly in the face of all that, doesn't it?
Yeah, the way I remembered it was opposite. So yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and at the end, we're left with this question of what will Derek do now? But we don't show it. It's over. So we're left with Danny's words from his essay that sort of sum up the ideas of the movie, right? Like, what do you want me to say? Hate is baggage, is where he sort of leaves us. He doesn't give us the answer. He doesn't say you shouldn't do this. He sums it up with what he has learned to be true. Hate hurts.
Do you have examples of movies or shows that are sort of more muddy throughout, rather than just sort of very clear and then they muddy things at the end?
Muddy throughout.
But deliberately muddy throughout, and where it works, like
something like well, I wonder, because like that's a good question. Maybe kind of like big ensemble dramas that have a lot of seasons.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Orange is the New Black. Yeah, a big ensemble drama. It's very messy and muddy, and the morals are murky, and you can take what you want and leave what you don't. Yeah, that makes sense. So, are there movies like that?
If you have a lot of characters on different journeys, then sometimes the point of those journeys might start to seem like it contradicts the other one. Or it might say, in some cases this is true, but in other cases it's not true. You know what I mean?
Does Shawshank Redemption have like a clear dramatic argument at the end?
Yeah.
It does? Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
And Green Mile does, yeah.
Hope is a good thing, and something worth holding on to is ultimately the message of Shawshank.
Okay, well, I've wasted enough time. It's food for thought.
That's okay, sure, yeah, no problem.
I'll have to think of more examples.
Wouldn't it be weird if in Shawshank they were like, hope is, well, it's alright, I guess. I mean, like, I'm not sure he likes being free that much.
We could take it or leave it.
Yeah, hope is fine. That's the worst dramatic argument I've ever heard. Hope is fine.
Prison wasn't so bad.
Yeah, you know what? I don't think I like this that much. I think I might go back.
that'd be a funny like button after he's out in the rain or whatever, and it's like prison wasn't so bad, and then he gets back in the pipe.
Goes right back in the sewer pipe. Wow, that would be a hell of an ending. That would be a very strong ending in its own right, but it would be a very silly one because we also do examine that question of because remember the Brooks subplot, which is one of the best subplots in any movie, does sort of ask this question of what if you don't know what to do with your freedom? Is freedom good? Like Stephen King is so good at taking that central theme and examining it from every angle. In Green Mile and Shawshank especially, it's like Green Mile being more about death and Shawshank being more about hope, right? The question being things like or freedom rather than life and death. Green Mile being like, well, what is it like to be the person that gives death to others? What is it like to make that judgment? What is it like to be the person that carries it out? What is it like to be the person that has that inflicted on them? What if living were its own kind of punishment? You know what I mean? So like he's so good at having like that same theme sort of attacked from every single angle and explored throughout his ensemble in many different ways.
Okay.
So we're basically at it. Thank you so much for the topic, by the way. We are basically out of time for our class. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody, for this top discussion on theme and dramatic argument. I'll check the chat really quick just to make sure there's not any last questions I missed. But let me leave you with the list of stuff coming up. Here's the free ones. In the next couple weeks, maybe I'll give you the full list. So, on the 24th, we have tone and genre, and on the 31st, we're talking funny third act tricks. We have week 0 of the pilot program on the 7th, and on the 13th, we're starting pilot, story engines and loglines, week 1. Definitely sign up and come join us if you're interested in taking any of these classes or being part of any of these great events, but if you're just coming by for the free ones, the writing groups and workshops, then we're also very glad to have you. And thank you to everybody that asked all these great questions and had all these great comments today. Oh, I think I see a question from YouTube, but it came in quite towards the end, so I'm just going to give Ronnie a shout out now. Hi, Ronnie. He said, did I stumble upon complete awesomeness at 8 in the morning while rando scrolling for morning binaural beats? Now I'm listening intently. Hello, Total Noob here. Hi, Ronnie. Yeah, you can actually even rewind the stream to the beginning if you want to watch everything else that came before then on YouTube. And if you're interested in this topic, Ronnie, or others, anyone else watching, you should come join us on Script Camp, which is a Discord server where you can find all kinds of classes, events, topics, and workshops just like this. So check out our website, scriptcamp.net, and we'll be glad to see you here soon. Thank you so much, guys. We will see you soon at your next class or event. And for all you boot campers, we have novel boot camp tomorrow, 12 to 2, and also lab from 4 to 6. So we'll see you guys there. Have a great rest of your weekend.